How's it everyone, this is Local with my Elemental Hit Vengeant Cascade Deadeye build. This is a build that I've been working on for the last week or so and I'm absolutely in love with it. I wanted to create a build that made use of the Vengeant Cascade technique as everyone else. However, I wanted a build that felt like one of those old classic blasting bow builds, but also one that was very well rounded. So one that actually had decent single target, but also one that could handle fairly juiced maps without dying constantly. And I think what I have here today is going to be that. So this is going to be a 10 to 15 divine budget version of the build. I am going to be working on a more expensive version that does way more damage, but for now, this is just the budget version that should be affordable for most players at this point in the league. So let's get into some of the mechanics of this build. Firstly, Vengeant Cascade. This is all the rage at the moment. This is an anoint on amulets. We use amber, gold, gold to get this anoint. And what this does is it works similarly to Nimbus, but for attack projectiles only. So this says attack projectiles return to you. So without our Vengeant Cascade, we shoot and the arrows go out. They don't come back. But with this, they go out and then they come back like that. This allows for multiple hits on single enemies, also allows for better clear because you're shooting in front and behind you. This is so powerful. Everyone is using it because of how good it is. So first of all, Vengeant Cascade, this is going to be critical for the build. Fortunately, it's fairly cheap. You can get the gold oils for about 45C and you only need 2. So 90C, double your damage. Easy. Next, we need to speak about Elemental Hit and the mechanics of this skill. It is important that I explain this because I need to explain why we're fully converting to fire. So Elemental Hit is an attack that hits with 3 different elemental types. So it does fire damage, cold damage, and lightning damage. However, each attack will select only one of those damage types to be dealt to the enemy, and the other 2 will deal no damage. However, if we're able to convert some of this damage to one element type, if the elemental hit selects that type, then we can convert it and gain some of the damage from that. At least that's how I understand it. Because of the direction of conversion, which is physical, lightning, cold, fire, chaos, converting to fire is easier because we can't go backwards in that process. We can't go lightning to fire to cold. We have to go lightning to cold to fire. And that's why we can scale the damage much more by going full fire. We're also making use of these combat focused jewels. With these, prismatic skills deal less cold damage and they cannot choose cold. So this thing, when it randomly selects an element with the combat focus, it cannot choose cold. And then we have another one here where it cannot choose lightning. So it's always going to be choosing fire. Also, we're making use of Xoph's blood. This gives us Avatar of Fire. This converts 50% of cold and lightning and physical damage to fire. However, we deal no non-fire damage. So this is a pure fire build. On top of that, we're using this Pyre to convert another 48% of that cold to fire damage. I just wanted to go over that because I'm sure a lot of people are going to be wondering, why are we going pure fire? And hopefully that answers the question. Basically, going pure fire allows us to make damage number go up. But let's get into some of the gear on this build. So for our bow, we're not going to be scaling flat damage on our bow. Instead, we're just going to be scaling gem levels with our elemental hit. So what we need is a +3 bow. This is very easy to make. And then attack speed, accuracy, elemental damage with attacks, fire damage to attacks. All of those are good. We're not going crit on this version. I will explain why later. But for our bow, we just want a +3 with attack speed. That's all you need. So this is very cheap. And while we're on the topic of our weapon, we have to talk about the Crucible Tree. And what I think is best, there might be some nodes that I'm not aware of that are better, but the one that's very important, +1 to level of socketed bow gems. This is going to increase the damage of our elemental hit. Scaling gem levels, like I said, makes damage go up. Another node that's excellent, Onslaught on Kill. This, attack speed and chance to gain Onslaught on Kill, very nice. Next, I have this. This just happened to be on this bow that I bought, but it also grants us endurance charges Really nice little bit of damage mitigation over here. And then this is so strong. 40% increase effect of marks and 200% increase mana cost of mark skills. So if you're looking for a bow, these are the two nodes that I would say are not mandatory, but these are your top choices from what I've seen. This is so good. Increase effect of your marks. And what's hilarious is that we are using life tap with our sniper's mark. So if you look here, 204, that is the cost of this. If we take off our bow, hey look, it's still 204. If we remove the life tap, you see it's 197 mana. If we remove it, it's 61 mana. And I thought that was amazing because of the wording on this. It says increased mana cost of mark skills. So we're basically getting 40% increase effect of our mark for free, for nothing. So if you're looking for a weapon, search for these two nodes. These are super good. Next, let's look at our body armor. We're using Lightning Coil. This provides us a massive amount of physical mitigation. The last line in this armor, 50% of physical damage from hits taken as lightning. So this build doesn't actually use determination. However, it's not squishy. It's not dying constantly in maps to physical hits. And part of the reason is because we are using a fair amount of fizz taken as elemental. So if we take a physical hit for 100, then 50 of that hit will be taken as lightning, which will then be mitigated by our lightning resistance. Don't worry, it's not capped, but I'll explain why later. So we're actually using our lightning resistance to mitigate physical damage. Jumping onto a flask, we're also doing that over here where we have fizz taken as cold. Same thing, that amount of physical damage we take as cold damage, which is then mitigated by our cold resistance and also by the bonuses of these flasks, which have 20% less lightning damage taken and 20% less cold damage taken. So that is how we are running without determination, without dying. There's other layers of defense, but let's hop over to Xoph's Blood. We just spoke about this one. Perfect amulet, Avatar of Fire, massive damage because it converts 50% of other physical elemental types to fire. Also a lot of strength, which we're going to need. Max life, fire resistance, fire penetration, and then cover enemies in ash, which applies increased fire damage to enemies who are covered in ash. And as for our Pyre ring, again, we're using this primarily for the cold converted to fire, but also it has corpse removal with the last line, ignited enemies killed by your hits or destroyed. So enemies that we ignite, like porcupines that spit out little spikes all over the place, those instead are destroyed. They don't spit their spikes at us. Also, we're getting a lot of burning damage on this. So Pyre, perfect ring for this build. Looking at the rest of it, it's mostly just going to be rares on this point. So I'm using a Feathered Arrow Quiver. You can use a Broadhead for the implicit attack speed, but projectile speed is actually quite important for our Vengeant Cascade because we want those projectiles to go out and come back in as quickly as possible. If you see this, you see it comes back a little bit slower, but if we pop that on, it goes out in, out in. So projectile speed is a great modifier. Also on our Quiver, we're looking for attack speed, life, resistances, damage with bow skills, elemental damage with attack skills, and accuracy. On a helmet, we're going to be wanting a bit of mana reservation efficiency. You can get this from using Essences of Loathing. I used a few Deafening Essences of Loathing and I hit this. Strength and Intelligence, very good on this build. This build is a bit stat hungry. Well, not hungry. It needs about 150 int and 150 strength, but there's not a whole lot on the tree that we're going past. So getting it on other pieces of gear, very important. As for the implicits, again, mana reservation and reduced mana cost of attacks. This is very important. So grab yourself a helmet and some Deafening Essence of Loathing and hit it till you get something that's just alright. You can get one with a Fracture like I've done, or you can get one with the enchant like this that I'm planning on doing a crafting video on. 15% increased elemental hit attack speed. That's going to be very, very nice. As for our other ring, resistances, life, elemental damage with attack skills, and then very important, non-channeling skills have -7 total mana cost. Is going to make it so we can reserve most of our mana and still be able to use our attacks. We're also going to be leeching some mana, so even though we only have a little bit, you should still be fine. Gloves are similar: life, resistances, accuracy, intelligence, and for the implicit, fire exposure is great. And then there's some other implicits that are good, but this one I hit when a unique enemy is in your presence, 30% increased attack speed. If you find something else, maybe you want Ignite Proliferation, you can use that instead. But gloves like this, actually very cheap, so not too bad. As for the belt, we're going for resistances, life, strength, all that good stuff, elemental damage with attack skills. I just crafted this with ROG and it happened to be perfect for my build. Otherwise, I would be using a Stygian. So if you can get a belt like this, that's a Stygian, that's perfect. But otherwise, for now, just to start, you can get yourself a little heavy belt like this. Booties are going to be similar. 30% increased movement speed. We just want life, movement speed, resistances, strength or intelligence. And as for these implicits, I should probably work on these. These are old ones that I just happened to hit. Ignore these. Brittle ground, useless. I think what would probably be more useful would be action speed. That improves all movement based things, so attack speed, movement speed. As for the enchant, reduced mana cost if you've been hit recently. Again, this is just something that happens to me on these pair of boots. I'll probably go with damage penetration or movement speed if you haven't been hit recently. Either of those would be good, but don't worry too much about the boot enchant right at the start. And then there's the flask. So Topaz Flask, very important for this build because we're going to be taking a lot of fizz as lightning. We want to reduce some of that. You don't necessarily have to use a Topaz Flask. I'm going to grab a Progenesis later and then I need to decide which one of these flasks drop, and it's probably going to be the Topaz Flask. But for now, Topaz Flask is great. It's going to help reduce that physical damage taken. Gain 2 charges when you're hit by an enemy, or 3 or whatever. That's a very nice prefix. And then as for your suffix, you want to get some kind of ailment avoidance or immunity. So on this one, I have immunity to poison. Next up, we have Dying Sun. This is more projectiles for us. More projectiles equals more damage. So during Flask effect, we get 2 more projectiles. Also, it happens to be a ruby flask, so we're reducing some more of the incoming elemental damage. Then just a Quicksilver flask. One like this might cost you about 70 C. I made this myself with just a few ults. I got a bit lucky, but movement speed, increased duration, just helps us go faster. Your life flask, instant recovery and corrupted blood immunity. If you have a corrupted blood immunity jewel, what you can do instead is get maybe immune to curses or something like that. But instant recovery is going to be the most important prefix on this. And then lastly, Taste of Hate. We're using this to get more fizz taken as elemental, in this case cold. And again, it's a sapphire flask, so we have a lot more cold resistance, a lot less cold damage taken. The fizz as extra cold, I don't think actually adds any damage. Oh, it does. Okay, well, that's another bonus. But that is why my lightning resistance is not capped. I have some tech that I'll show you in a bit. That means we have very, very high flask uptime, so I'm actually not too stressed about that. So that's all of it for the gear, and I haven't mentioned it, but I have a little spreadsheet that you can check out. It's a shopping list where you can just click links to buy different pieces of gear that I would recommend for this build. There is something like that in Path of Building, but it's a bit buggy, so I decided to just make a little spreadsheet. So if you want to play this build, you just click all the links. I checked it. All those pieces of gear add up to about 12, 13 divines, maybe all the way up to 15 divines for what we have here. Let's have a look at the gems. So we have 2 different attack setups. We have one clear skill, which is going to be this Elemental Hit. This one is much more spready outy, and it does more to clear, whereas we have a second setup, which is a Barrage setup. This is what we use for single targets. So if you find a boss, or if you find a map boss, or a tanky rare, you can use this skill instead of this one, but for general clear, just using normal Elemental Hit. The links you can check out. This in PoWAH you can swap out for a fire penetration support instead. However, level 3 in PoWAH is just about 50 chaos, so it's not too bad. We're also using Barrage Archer on this. You can't see it happening unless I kill a monster, but this just helps assist with clear. As for the other links, we have Inspiration, Elemental Damage with attacks. We're moving on to Awakened Elemental Damage with attacks later on, and then Combustion. We are not going crit on this build, at least in this form. Later on we will go crit, but Combustion is nice. It applies some form of elemental penetration, but it also gives us a chance to ignite, which makes it easier to apply that without critting all the time. The links in this one are very similar. Ignore this elemental penetration. This should be a fire penetration. This is a bit of a vestige from an older version of the build that I was using, and I haven't fixed it, but all these links will be in POB. Let's talk about some of the other setups. Now, this is very important. Sniper's Mark. This is where we're getting a lot of our single target damage. Cursed enemies take 41% increased damage from projectile hits, and projectiles which hit cursed enemies split towards 5 additional targets. This is the single target. This, along with Vengeant Cascade, means that when you hit a single target, it's going to cover your screen in arrows, because this is going to split, give you plus 5 additional arrows, and then they're all going to come back on that boss and hit it a bunch of times. Now, very, 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 very important, life tap. You must use your life tap with this. If you do not have life tap, this will never cast because we are linking it with mark on hit support. So this is an auto trigger, I suppose, for our mark. If you don't have that, you're not going to have enough mana to do it. Your mark's never going to work, and you're going to feel like you're doing no damage. I made that mistake, and it was embarrassing, but I figured it out. You just need to make sure your life tap is actually in there, and it's not an empower gem that you accidentally swapped out. So Sniper's Mark, mark on hit, and life tap. Later on, I would like to put enhance in here just to increase the quality of these, which is quite important. But for now, I have a Blood Rage in this socket. This build, because of the 2 6-link setups, is quite socket starved. So you might even want to go for an unset ring instead of a 2-stone ring, but we might actually be able to drop Blood Rage. At a later stage, I might even drop the second 6-link setup and do a 6-link aura setup or something like that. But for now, this is how I have it. That's working great. Now, another very, very important setup is our Frenzy Generation setup, and we're going to be using the new Manaforged Arrows support. So what this does is, it says, supports bow attack skills, causing them to trigger when you've spent enough mana in total on other bow attacks. So the way this works is, after we've attacked with another skill enough, this is automatically going to trigger whatever is linked to it. And in this case, we have Frenzy, which is going to give us more Frenzy charges. This automatically generates Frenzy charges, but we're also using Ensnaring Arrow. This is a debuff that slows down enemies and causes them to take increased damage from projectile hits. On the crit version, I'll probably swap out Ensnaring Arrow for Power Charge and Crit, so we can get some power charges. But for now, Ensnaring Arrow, Frenzy, and Manaforged Arrow. Let me just demonstrate. You're going to see some little green arrows shoot out of me. There. Yep. 1, 2, 3, 4. There. They shoot out. But if we go fast, they're just shooting out the whole time. Don't worry about me running out of mana. This doesn't actually happen in maps. But yeah, there we go. As for our movement skills, we're using Dash, like that, just to get out of tricky situations quickly, and Blink Arrow. But this is just to do more quick moving across terrain. And then lastly, let's talk about our auras. So we're using Grace just for more evasion rating and chance to dodge. Anger for more fire damage. If you want to get very tanky, you can maybe use a Determination, but I would recommend sticking with Anger for now. And then lastly, Petrified Blood. This is so strong. With the other layers of defense that we have, with the Fizz taken as elemental, and also the evasion, Petrified Blood is so good. A lot of people watching me play this build said that it felt stressful because I was constantly close to dying, but it never really feels like that when I'm playing it because Petrified Blood just keeps you alive. The way this works, it applies a buff that protects the lower half of your life, preventing some of the immediate life loss when damaged by hits, and then applying the loss over a time instead. The downside though is your life cannot be raised above low life other than by flasks. So we cannot actually leech our way back up to full life, but we can use our flasks to get to full life. But the way this works is it delays damage that you take. You can see the exact numbers on the gem, but putting this on makes you feel so much tankier. And we can get use of this from the Progenesis Flask later on when we have a bit more currency. But that is the 3 auras. We're not running Determination. and I feel really good without it. So that's it for the gems. Before we have a look at the tree, I just want to point out these Flask Enchants. These are very important. What you actually want on these is use when charges reach full on your flasks. This will mean that your flasks automatically turn on when you need them or when they reach full. So if you're doing very heavy mob density mapping, then this will mean that your flasks are pretty much always up. I'm using reuse at the end of this flask effect. I will explain why now when we hop into the passive tree. So the passive tree is pretty classic bow build. However, there are some things I want to point out. I'm not providing a leveling tree with this because it's not a league starter build. You can level with one with nothing. I'll provide a link for that leveling in the description. But we're grabbing things like charisma, life, elemental penetration, an additional projectile with multi-shot, and down here with Master Fletcher, grabbing some frenzy charges, a bit more elemental damage with attacks here and here, life, and then more frenzy charges. And then let's talk about some of these masteries starting at the top. So we're getting some leech over here, and we're grabbing the 10% of leech is instant. This is great. Over here we're grabbing the 15% chance to suppress spell damage if equipped. Helmet, body armor, gloves, and boots all have evasion rating, so you want to make sure helmet, body armor, gloves, and boots have evasion rating for a 1.15 suppression. Over here then we're grabbing chance to suppress spell damage is lucky. If you can cap your spell suppression, I'm at 89%. Then you can remove this, get another free point, or take one of these other masteries. Down here, accuracy. Maybe we should talk about it right now. I'm using precise technique on this build. What this says, 40% more attack damage if accuracy is higher than maximum life, but you never deal critical strikes. So before I picked this up, I was trying to scale some crit chance, and it just felt like I needed to invest so much to get that amount of damage that I was getting from precise technique fairly easily. We were grabbing these nodes, lethality and King of the Hill, with some crit chance, but I wasn't getting enough crit on the rest of my gear to feel that it was worth investing in. So I thought, why don't we try precise technique for the budget version? And it's been very good. So because of this, we need our accuracy to be quite high. As you can see over here, it's 4774. Our life is at 4327. It was a bit higher. I was grabbing these life nodes down here, but I decided to take this dual socket for reasons we will get to. So this is why I have so much accuracy on my gloves and my bow and on my quiver. I have the accuracy enchant over here, but I've also picked up this accuracy wheel here, and then this accuracy mastery over here. Dex accuracy bonus instant grants 3 accuracy rating per dexterity. So this will help us catch up and get that dexterity high enough where it is higher than our life. And this build, I do put some life points on the tree, so you are going to have to invest in some accuracy. If you can't get enough accuracy on your gear, you can pick up these nodes. Depth perception, it's right up top where we already are. I also at one stage had to pick up these nodes, bow accuracy and farsight. That was just because I was lazy and not buying proper gear with accuracy on it. So if you really are accuracy starved, you can grab these, you can drop these points and grab that. But yeah, precise technique is a very nice way to really ramp up our damage without having to invest a huge amount with crit. As for other things, marked for death, this gives us culling strike against marked enemy. This is great. It kills enemies that are on 10% or lower life. There's also another mark wheel up here that you can grab if you want. However, I think the culling strike is really good and really nice to finish off enemies. We're going for the marked enemies cannot deal critical strike mastery. This you could swap for the enemies near your marked enemy are blinded, or enemies cannot regenerate life. I like the marked enemies cannot deal crits. It's nice for bosses and things like that. And then point blank. Now, this was a keystone that I was uncertain of. The way this works, projectile attacks hits deal 30% more damage to targets at the start of their movement, dealing less damage as the projectiles travel farther. Now, because we're using Vengeant Cascade, our projectiles are traveling pretty far before coming back. However, the way I've been playing this build is I do, when I get to a boss, stand on top of it and just spam my barrage. So I base this on feeling more than numbers. If you go in PoB and you do the numbers right, it looks really good. But I wanted to actually feel it in game, and it did feel better using this. And because the build is kind of tanky, well, tankier than most bow builds, we can actually make use of this and stand right in front of the boss without being terrified of dying constantly. So point blank, great. We're also grabbing Wind Dancer. I actually just put this in today as well. I feel like it's another nice layer of defense, less attack damage taken if you haven't been hit by an attack recently. So that first attack that does land after you've evaded a whole lot will deal less damage. And then after you've been attacked, you have more chance to evade attacks and more attack damage taken if you have been hit by an attack recently. I might keep testing this and decide to remove it, but for now it feels good because we have a decent evasion rating at the moment, 13.8. We could get that higher if we wanted, but it feels pretty good. So Wind Dancer, you don't have to pick it up, but I've been feeling it's pretty good. And then let's finish up by talking about our cluster jewels. So this is the ideal kind of cluster jewel we want. However, this is quite expensive. I paid 4 divines for this one. Martial Prowess, increased attack damage, attack speed, accuracy, and damage with elements from attack skills. Feel the Fight, we're getting some more mana leech, we're getting attack speed and damage while leeching. And same with Feed the Fury, except this is life. So we are leeching life and more damage, well, increased damage while leeching, and increased attack speed while leeching. These three together add a crazy amount of damage. However, if you can only afford a 2 out of 3, which is very cheap, normally you can get one of these for about 15 chaos, then you can use 2 out of 3 of these. Feel the Fight, Feed the Fury, I would recommend, and then get Martial Prowess as the third one. So make sure it's an 8 passive, and again, this is in the shopping list that I have provided. Then for our medium sockets, over here we have the classic eye-to-eye repeater. This grants us increased projectile damage and attack speed, and over here we have increased projectile damage, and projectiles deal increased damage with hits against nearby enemies, which goes nicely with our point blank. As for the other medium cluster, if you want a lot more damage, grab another one of these. That's absolutely fine. However, I decided instead to pick up a medium Flask cluster. So this one on the right, Peak Vigor, gives us increased life recovery from flasks and increased maximum life. And then Spiked Concoction, attack speed during flask effect, and grants Alchemist's Genius when you use a flask. This grants us increased flask charges gained by 20% and increased effect of flasks by 10% for 4 seconds, which is pretty much always because we're always using our flasks. So if you want more damage, you can use this, but I've been really enjoying this, just having more flask charges gained and having more effective flasks. Now, the reason why I have picked up these different enchants on my flasks, reused at the end of this flask effect, was I was investigating some Forbidden Flame jewels that I wanted to use. All of the Deadeye ones are very expensive. Ideally, what you want is any one of these 4, and then Far Shot. Far Shot you can get, but a pair of these jewels cost 30 divines at minimum. It's very expensive. So this is ideal, Far Shot, but before you buy your Forbidden Flesh jewels, just check the prices of these ones. Ricochet, Endless Munitions, Focal Point, and Gathering Winds. Because if one of these is cheaper, what you can do is just, let's say we find a very cheap Gathering Winds jewel, we can unspec that, and then instead just spec into Far Shot, and then use the Forbidden Flesh Flame for Gathering Winds, for example. But I found these. Allocates Master Alchemist if you have the matching modifier on Forbidden Flame. This is a Pathfinder notable. Removes elemental ailments when you use a flask, which in this case is constantly, so we're pretty much ailment immune. And 50% chance for flasks you use to not consume charges. This is really good, and guess what I paid for these? Combined, this is about 1.5 divines for both of these. That, however, is why I've decided to use the reuse at the end of this flask effect rather than reuse when flask charges are full. The reuse when flask charges are full is better. It does feel a bit better. However, the way this works is if we have used when flask charges reach full and we're not using charges, it kind of spams your flasks. So if you do proc this chance for your flask to not use charges and it's full, then it just keeps spamming it until it's used. I'm pretty sure that's what was happening, because when I had those other enchants, my flasks were just weird and always empty. So if you do go with this, which I recommend, it's been feeling really good to me, just swap out the enchants on your flasks. And then for our Ascendancy, we are going Deadeye because it's just good, man. It's just good. We're getting Ricochet, Skills Chain +1 time, and Projectiles have a 30% chance to be able to chain when colliding with terrain. So our Projectiles are going to go out, hit stuff, and then bounce around. And then over here, Endless Munitions, skills fire 2 additional projectiles. Gathering Wind, this is Tailwind, so we gain 1 Gale Force when you use a skill. We're spamming our skills constantly, like that. So we're gaining a Gale Force every single time. And 15% increased effect of Tailwind on you per Gale Force, and you and nearby enemies have Tailwind. What Tailwind does is it increases our action speed by 8%. Action speed, like I said earlier, is attack speed, movement speed, all things that involve moving. So with 10 stacks, we have 150% increased effect of Tailwind, which equates to 12% increased action speed. And then lastly, Focal Point. 75% increased effect of your marks, 25 less damage taken from other enemies near your marked enemy, and your mark transfers to another enemy when marked enemy dies. This is very nice for clear. Now, 75% increased effect of your mark. Check this out. Sniper's Mark. Cursed enemies take 41% increased damage from projectile hits, but also they split towards 5 additional targets. So 75% increased mark plus 40% increased mark, we're getting over 100% increased effect of our marks. This is a lot of projectiles, this is a lot of increased damage, so Focal Point is great for this build for single target. Before we go, I just want to talk about the playstyle of this build. There are some things we need to pay attention to. So firstly, we have, like I said earlier, we have our 2 elemental hit setups. You're going to see when we go in this map, we're using the 1, and you can see our little Mirage Archer doing some work. I'm not even attacking now. For normal clear, we're just using that. We're just using our normal elemental hit. Also, with our flasks, with this enchant, I have to tap my flasks at the start of the map, and then they should just auto refill and reuse. However, with our Dying Sun, we might have to tap that a few times, but we're getting plenty of flask charges while we're doing this. And this is why people, I think, watching me, so they felt anxious watching this, because I'm permanently, well, not permanently on low life, but fairly often on low life because of the Petrified Blood. However, we are getting so many flask charges that you can pretty much just spam your life flask. Like, I'm hitting it so much there, and it's just going to get refilled very, very, very quickly. So for this guy, if we find a little rare mob like this guy who's a bit tanky, we can use our Barrage setup. Same with this guy. Barrage, barrage, barrage. Let's see if we can tank this. Okay, wait, that didn't count. And the same thing for map buffs. So when we get to our map boss or an essence, we can spam our Barrage setup. I know the damage doesn't look insane, but we're not dying. Map boss, we get here, we pop our Dying Sun, we can pop our Blood Rage, and then that guy goes down pretty quickly. And now, as for things like Legions, I've been farming Legion. I will do a guide on what I've been farming lately. But yeah, they were just using our normal Barrage setup, and it clears very nicely. If you find a tanky guy like this, Barrage him down. Same guy, Barrage this guy down. Same with this guy. And as you can see, because we're using point blank, I'm trying to stand on top of the bosses or on top of the rares so that I can do as much damage as possible and gain that more damage multiplier for projectile hits when we are nearby. But yeah, I'm never really feeling threatened. I know it looks like I'm on low life a lot of the time, primarily because I don't spam my life loss, but I often don't feel like I have to. I just don't die a bunch. I do die. Look, this build does die. It's not RF or something. I'm not getting past, you know, the 10% mark on my level 97 character, but I normally run 5 or 6 maps before I die, and then just, you know, click too many altars or something like that, or just run into the wrong essence mob and then I get wrecked. But it's rarely a surprise when I die. Normally I'm doing something very stupid that I could have avoided. So yeah, I'm really happy with how this is. It's a very well-rounded build, good clear, good single target, doesn't die all the time, but it does have some weaknesses. So let's just, before we go, quickly go over that. So one of the major weaknesses, chaos damage. Chaos damage, yeah, when we get our Progenesis, this will help a bit. I also want to recraft some of my gear pieces to get more chaos resistance. Also, ground degens can be really deadly. Earlier I did a Cirrus and I kept dying to his ground degens. I think it's because I was constantly getting to half life by using my Blood Rage. My life would just drain, I wouldn't regen it back past halfway, then I would stand on a ground degen and die. And the thing with this build is when you're fighting a boss, there are so many projectiles on the screen that you cannot actually see the ground. So one of the strengths of this build is just a bajillion projectiles. It makes it feel like an old school classic PoE build, but at the same time that is kind of blinding and you can't see what's happening on the ground. So ground degens will probably kill you. Chaos damage will probably also kill you if you're on chaos cap, but the rest actually feels pretty good. I've tanked slams, I've done bosses where I just stand still and pew pew them, I tank their slams and I'm fine, so it's good. But that is going to be it for the Ele Hit Vengeant Cascade Deadeye. Let me know if you want to play this build. I'm in love with it, honestly, I really am. I'm enjoying it so much. If you do play it, let me know, and of course join the Discord. You can always ask questions about this build if you're facing any issues with maybe single target or something like that. And if you enjoyed the video, please like, subscribe, all that stuff, and I'll catch you later. Have a wonderful day, everyone. Stay safe, and bye-bye.